Good morning out there. Me and the kitty coming to you from my new apartment in San Francisco and my new pink hair. And wanting to talk to you about this new theme that I'm bringing forth about conscious relationships and the magic of conscious relationships. And I'm lining up some of my favorite thought-leading friends to have conversations with to make available to you as we come into this new year and maybe a new level of consciousness, right? Some would say astrologically we could be told we're entering the age of Aquarius, and so many ways and reasons that we're changing, right? And feeling ready for change, social change. And I realize this is something that I've been interested in for a long time. The idea of social change, right? How does it happen? How can we facilitate it? How can we be a part of that and more consciously? So something I've been looking at, and hey, I see some of my friends here. And yeah, something I've been thinking about is this idea of, especially if we want to be more spiritual in our paradigms, in our approaches with ourselves, with each other, with how we're living on the planet, right? That it really can change the lens that we're looking at relationships through, right? And I feel like it's interesting for me to bring this forth because I'm someone who came to these more metaphysical, spiritual studies after having been entrenched in the world of modern psychology. Going to graduate school in psychology years ago is what I was up to before I was studying things like yoga and meditation and more of this spiritual approach even, right? Which is a lot of what things like yoga are supposed to be about. So as I've done my learning and growth and studies and become more spiritual myself, you could say, looking at modern psychology and the effects that it's had on our consciousness, right? On how we are with each other socially. And in some ways, I feel like in these last 20, 25 years, say, there's been, yes, a lot of awareness that's been helpful. A lot of awareness of things like labels, diagnosis, patterns, parts of being human that we can become more aware of, right? Things like that we can get toxic, this idea of getting toxic in relationships, right? And when we're talking about relationships, we're not just talking about romantic relationships, although that's one of those more interesting ones, right, for a lot of us, but relationships with our brothers, sisters, children's partners, friends, workmates, and just all the people of the world, right? So we're talking about all of the above. But I feel like modern psychology has brought in an awareness, yes, and some labels and some consciousness that's been helpful, right? And even bringing in some things like boundaries for some of us, right? And just taking an ownership for our role in things. And yes, that we do want to be choosing and conscious about what sorts of relationships we're engaging in, how we're being in relationships, and yes, being able to observe and be more of a witness with ourselves and others. But I feel like one piece that's come in that hasn't been helpful, that isn't very spiritual, right, is this judgment that comes with all of that, right? And this potential for separation and for starting to look at our brothers and sisters that we're in relationship with, right? And okay, I'm back, sorry. Maybe how we've taken these labels, this awareness has not been so helpful, right? And our feelings of connection, not only with ourselves, right? Because sometimes we're applying those labels to ourselves and deciding things about ourselves and putting ourselves in a box about what's possible in our relationships, right? And then we certainly see ourselves doing that to others, right? Where we can very quickly label someone as, for instance, toxic, and someone that we just want to like get out of our life, right? And put them in a box with that label and that diagnosis. And or maybe we decide someone has a personality disorder, right? Whatever we might have been doing along the lines of trying to, of course, yes, make our way, make sense of things, right? And have boundaries. And yes, be in relationships that are enriching, right? And are contributing to our lives. But also when we're looking at all sorts of relationships, some relationships, well, we don't want to feel like that's our only choice, right? To cut people out, to label them as toxic, abusive, to decide something about them or ourselves that means we can't be connected anymore, right? And not to honor that that's not right for some relationships, right? And if you've chosen that along your journey, that doesn't mean that we need to judge ourselves, right? But when we're bringing in this judgment with ourselves, that some of those aspects, some of those ways of being are right or wrong, good or bad, right? What that means about a person too, right? Often we're forgetting that we're just talking about someone's behavior. That maybe, for instance, if we're talking about being toxic, that was toxic behavior, right? It doesn't mean it's a toxic person. So this is some of the consciousness that I feel like is new or old, right? But important to be bringing in now, especially if we want to feel like we're being more spiritual, right? If we do want to be embracing this idea that we are also connected, that we are all children of the universe, children of God, right? That every being on the planet is our brother and sister, and that especially if we're calling ourselves like a yogi, right? And we're thinking we're in that namaste awareness, which reminding us is that idea that the light in me, the God in me is remembering that and seeing that in you, right? So are we doing that whether we meet someone new or we've been with someone for 20 years, right? In relationship of any sort, when we bring in those labels, right? When we bring in that separation, when we put that person or ourselves in a box, in some ways that I fear modern psychology has infiltrated our consciousness in a way that's not totally helpful. So I feel like it's time for us to evolve and yes, bring the wisdom of modern psychology and the helpful applications of things like diagnosis, right? Or labels, descriptions, awareness, right? Patterns in relationships. But even that, it's really just magical. This is really what I want to talk about a lot too in this series that I'm going to be bringing forth about the magic of conscious relationships is what's changeable in relationship, not only in the dynamics of a relationship, whether it's a new relationship, an old relationship, right? What's changeable, what's possible when we have two people that are conscious, right? And being intentional. And what's changeable and possible within ourselves, right? Within relationships and how we can be within relationships. And I think that brings us back to this fundamental question of, hey, seeing more friends, yeah. Do we believe there's that old paradigm that like people never change, right? So you have to just accept if someone's like that. And granted, yes, I agree. We shouldn't be trying to change someone else, right? I agree. And those patterns of codependence that I for sure have been in where we might be confused about our role in someone else's path and journey and life and feelings, right? And ways that isn't helpful for us or them. But when we're really honoring and remembering that we're two sovereign beings, right? And again, back in this more spiritual approach that like, I'm a child of God, you're a child of God. How can we go about this? And also, if we're looking at what do we think is possible for human beings, do we think that people never change? Or do we think that people are always changing, right? And so it's like you can't believe both, right? So do you believe that we never change and we're always going to stay the same, and if you're born this way, you're going to just be that way, right? And not that there aren't some inherent traits, maybe some of our strengths and gifts for sure, that maybe we wouldn't want to change. But on the other hand, or do we see that maybe things are always changing, people are always changing, and it's more about choosing the direction of that change, right? For sure. Again, that's where that consciousness is the key word. So the magic of conscious relationships versus unconscious, right? And that just means, yes, being more conscious in our perspective, first of all, which is just how are we looking at this other person? Again, whether it's our brother, sister, child, mother, romantic partner, friend, workmate, right? Anybody we're in relationship of any sorts. How are we looking at them, right? Are we looking at them as something that we're separated from, something that we're fighting with? There's my heater. Or are we remembering and wanting to be in that consciousness that like, I am God, you are God, let's meet there, right? And also, do we believe in this, like we're fixed in a pattern and an awareness and a dynamic, whether it's how we have to be with that person or just how we are, or how they are? Do we believe that that's just what is and has to always be? Or are we open to change? And then really the best, most exciting part that I want to talk about more with this series is, yeah, right, modern psychology goes in a lot of directions now. I agree, James. Yeah, but what's changeable and possible through relationship, right? That is something we haven't been talking about much. We've been talking in modern psychology a lot about how relationships can hurt us and harm us and traumatize us, right? But we haven't talked much about how relationships can and maybe are meant to be, and this is any kind of relationship, right? A place, an amazing place for us to be growing and changing and healing and facing our stuff and feeling our stuff and moving through of our stuff and changing who we are and how we are through that relationship, right? Through that mirror of relationship. And that's what's so interesting too, how much relationships give us a chance to take a look at ourselves, like it or not. And that's why maybe some of us might get moments where we're not sure we want to be in a relationship, I'm noticing, because it means we have to deal with ourselves in a whole new way. But yeah, just excited about what's possible when we're coming from a more spiritual paradigm, when we're being more open about what's possible with humans and not letting the modern psychology fuck with our possibilities, right? For ourselves and with others, and especially in those relationships that we don't want to just toss out the window, right? If it's our relationship with our child or our sister or our brother, whoever it is, right? So I'm just excited to start the conversation more about what's possible and the magic of conscious relationships. And again, and James says, nothing has been brought to the forefront of how relationships can help us heal, right? So I'm just interested in that. And this is, again, I feel like it's an interesting line. Someone who I've totally identified as being someone who could be called codependent, right? And that have seen how me getting involved with another person's story, whoever it is, could be a place where I could get lost and do some dysfunctional things, right? And try to take care of someone else's feelings and even help direct someone else's path in a way that isn't helpful. Because I do believe we should all have the freedom to be who we are and to make our own personal choices, and that hopefully a relationship only encourages that. But yeah, but on the other side, we know where relationships can traumatize us, but how beautiful is it that our relationships can be that place for healing and transformation and, you know, just part of our evolution, right? Part of our spiritual alignment too, right? That whole thing, when two or more come together, then the presence of God is even more present. So, oh my gosh, so I'm excited to talk about this more and hopeful that it's helpful at this time when maybe we're feeling even more disconnected than ever from people around the world, right? For various reasons, whether it's about the virus, about politics, right? So I feel like in general, it's just going to be really a good feeling focus, get that momentum toward what we do want in our relationships. And of course, I think the base of the conversation is how important our relationship with ourself is, right? And that's where a conscious relationship can most stem from, is the more that we're in touch and in tune with ourselves and doing things to take care of ourselves and recognizing that we're in charge of taking care of our feelings, right? That all can be part of this conscious relationship thing, instead of like blaming other people, right, for how we feel or expecting them to take care of our feelings. But yeah, I feel like excited about as we bring in some of these aspects that we now know work as part of being more conscious, but also it's about, yeah, if we want to be more spiritual, bringing that into our relationships of any type with any person, remembering again, I am God, you are God, what's possible here, and just that aspect of change and holding that space for ourselves and each other, and even as we support our loved ones in their relationships, right? Starting those conversations more about how beautiful it is, the alchemy of relationship, right? Versus the trauma and drama of relationship. We've been talking about that a lot, which has probably been important, right? But it feels good and right to me to move in more of a direction of what's possible in the name of love, right? From this more conscious place and from this more spiritual place, right? So I hope you'll stay tuned. I'm going to be doing these conversations on things like Facebook and YouTube, and then I'll be bringing pieces of it here on Instagram, if this is where you're seeing this video. And just wanting to, I want to do more learning and discovery, and I'm excited for what's going to come through. So thanks for being here with me. my first vid in my new apartment here. And love you all so much. Let me know what you think about conscious relationships. Stay tuned. Namaste.